Hello and welcome to the show. Now, it wasn't so long ago that the 200-mile-an-hour mark was pretty much the holy grail for supercar manufacturers, and it wasn't until the Ferrari F40 came along that it was ever beaten. And while these days the very fastest of hypercars are now looking to go well past 270 miles an hour, still getting into that 200-mile-an-hour club is rather difficult, and it is almost solely exclusive to the likes of supercars and hypercars of this world. And they are certainly not cheap, going to be costing you many hundreds of thousands of credits, and that kind of got me thinking, just how cheaply could I buy a car and then build it up to reach this mythical 200-mile-an-hour mark? The F40, you're looking at 450,000 credits for this car. A fantastic vehicle as it is. I had no doubt that we'd be able to build a car to be considerably cheaper. Now, I did say it is almost exclusive to the supercars. There are a couple of cheaper options. The Corvette ZR1, for example, will easily crack 200 miles an hour. That's just 110,000 credits. However, the Dodge Hellcat cars have got the Corvette beat. Both the Challenger and Charger will go past 200. Not quite as convincingly as the Corvette, but they will still get past it. The Challenger, being the slightly cheaper of the two at just 75,000 credits, then would be sort of our target. After all, this is a completely stock car. 75,000 credits will get you an awful lot of vehicles. 707 horsepower in this thing. Crazy, crazy levels of power. I do love the Hellcat cars. They're absolutely bonkers, and an awful lot of straight line speed, but I was hoping that I could do better. Now, my initial thought was to buy a rather cheap car, for example this RX-3, among the cheapest of the vehicles that you can buy in the game at just 12,000 credits, and then stick a very, very big engine in it. For example, the quad-rotor racing engine. I know from experience, you put a quad-rotor in this, take the restrictors off, it'll get well past 200 miles an hour. There is, however, a problem. While the car is inexpensive, the engine costs 60,000 credits, and that is, well, pretty much all of the budget gone. Then you've got to worry about gearboxes and diffs and so on just to get the car able to reach the speed. It all adds up, and the problem is that the engine swaps, the kind of engines that you want, the crazy racing, hugely powerful engines that you want to put in these cars, cost so much money to swap them into the vehicles that while, yes, you will get very, very stupid and barely controllable cars to reach the 200-mile-an-hour mark, they're more expensive than the likes of the Hellcats. So, while yes, cheaper than the F40, this wasn't really going to be a viable option. They are also an absolute pain in the arse if you try and get them around a corner. Well, they don't really go around, certainly not this one. Doesn't really go around corners and spins its wheels. Makes a glorious noise, but yeah, trying to keep it under control at speeds getting up towards that kind of area was, yeah, pretty ridiculous. Now, the first place that I was going to start with, well, sticking with the American super muscle cars, the Dodge Viper GTS ACR, just 51,000 credits was needed to get this vehicle up to that 200-mile-an-hour mark. Now, the real aim of this is you've got to pick a car that needs as little upgrades as possible for it to reach the speed, and the Viper took one. I only had to put the race camshafts in this vehicle to get it to hit 200 miles an hour, as the standard car was pretty damn close. That upgrade, 3,000 credits. Not too shabby then. However, the vehicle starts off at 48,000 credits. So, yeah, 51,000 credits. It certainly beats the two Hellcat vehicles. I still suspected that I could do a little bit better. I'm always glad, though, to have a Viper, and yeah, only needing one upgrade is rather useful. Often the difficulty with this, of course, is, when I'm doing speed running with vehicles, I'll tend to go for the classic race cars. They're very easy to get them up to huge amounts of speed because they are incredibly aerodynamic. But that kind of vehicle is very much out of the question. I need the base car to be nice and cheap, and while the Viper, for the performance, is pretty damn good value for money, there are cheaper options out there. Up next came the Toyota Supra, 43,400 credits, so 7,000 or 6,000 a bit credits cheaper than the Viper. Now, I would probably tend not to particularly think that much about using the Supra for this. However, I had noticed when I did the autocross car build on this, the turbo upgrades add tremendous amounts of power. This car, the second most powerful car in this list, with 590 horsepower, and all that comes from is upgrading the turbos, put them up to race turbos, and the car will hit 200 miles an hour without too much problem. And it's a relatively cheap upgrade, just 5,400 credits. It doesn't matter the fact that the turbos add 200 and something horsepower, or whether they add kind of 80 horsepower. The race turbos are the price that they are, and because that adds such a huge amount of power to the Supra, it seemed like a good idea to me. So yeah, just 43,400 credits would be enough to get the Supra up to the mark. Admittedly, the car itself starts off relatively expensive. It is 10,000 credits cheaper than the Viper, though, 38,000 for the Supra. Yeah, basically, stupendously powerful turbos were a pretty good idea for this one. So yeah, the Supra most definitely worked. The AMC Javelin, though, did come in cheaper, 41,750. Most of the classic muscle cars were pretty much out of the question, costing far too much money, many of them in the 80, 100,000 credit sort of region. I knew that these were going to need a fair amount of parts. After all, they're not the most aerodynamic of shapes. However, the Javelin does start off as one of the cheapest of the muscle cars, just 22,000 credits to buy the Javelin. Now, this is our most powerful car in this list, 609 horsepower, about 670 torque, so very, very powerful. I had initially planned to stick the NASCAR engine into this one, but that was a far too expensive swap, so this is still running on the standard engine. And this was the car that I had to spend the most money on parts. 19,750 credits went on the parts in this vehicle. It is pretty much running a maxed out engine in this to try and get it up to that 200 mile an hour mark, and it does just reach. You'll notice I'm running the wrong way down the Le Mans straight because this gives the cars the best chance to reach the 200 mile an hour mark. You will also notice that the cars that were pushing my luck a little bit more on, I will migrate around this sort of final corner. If you really hug the inside, the track goes slightly downhill, and you can just tick over to that 200 mile an hour if you get it right. You will also see if the car's more out of control coming to a stop down here, then I was probably pushing my luck as well, leaving it as late as I possibly could to get on the brakes, but the Javelin did do it. Up next, we move to BMW for the 850, under 40,000 credits now to get this vehicle up to that 200 mile an hour mark. This was another car, much like I picked with the Viper. This one needed very, very little in the way of work to get it to the required speed. Again, just the race camshafts went into this one, so 3,000 credits for them. The car itself, 35,000. Still a little bit more of an expensive base car than the likes of the Javelin, but we did need to do very, very little work to the vehicle. Also, a relatively aerodynamic car. And I actually found myself buying sort of different cars to the normal vehicles that I would use for this sort of challenge, because I had to buy, you're not going to get classic car. Classic cars are very much out of the question. They're going to be far too much money. So I was having to buy more modern cars, but equally we couldn't buy too modern cars because they were still a little bit too expensive. So I was buying these sort of 80s, 90s, early 2000 cars, and this is kind of where I was looking for the cars that came with the most power to start with. A lot of these vehicles were ending up with around the mid 450, 470 horsepower mark to get them up towards their speed. The BMW, relatively easy, up to 200 miles an hour. Wasn't a massive problem with that one. The Lotus Carlton is in this. I was very, very happy that I could get the Lotus Carlton into here. 37,400 credits for this car. After all, the Lotus Carlton was by far the fastest four-door saloon car for a number of years. When it came out, it was just absolutely decimated the opposition. And it was another car that wasn't too far away from that 200 mile an hour mark to start with. Did need a little bit more work on this one, while 29,000 credits, for the car, relatively inexpensive for the amount of performance you get. I couldn't quite just get away with the race camshaft. We did have that as an upgrade along with the upgraded race turbos. And they're the two upgrades that you're going to see time and time again on these vehicles. I was, wanting the upgrades that give me the most power, as that was the cheapest way to get the speed up. Yes, there are other ways to, increase the speed and so on, but I can't really do anything with the aerodynamics, so that was out of the question. Just chucking as much horsepower at these cars as I could was the way to go. And going for the race camshafts, going for the race turbos were the most cost-effective way. I was pushing my luck. Again, you can see with the Carlton, I was really pushing my luck with this one. It's nowhere near as aerodynamic as that BMW, as, yeah, I can't get it stopped. It very much was just clicked over to 200 miles an hour as we got it around the turn. Now, another four-door saloon car up next, the BMW M5, 35,000 credits for this one. I was actually quite surprised by this M5. It's one of the lesser powerful vehicles to go through all of this. When I think this was the second car that I built when I was messing about with these vehicles, I thought 35,000 credits was going to be pretty damn tough to beat for these vehicles. You see, we've got the telemetry running up there. Getting these cars up to 170 miles an hour was not particularly hard. Most of them were doing it well before we got to the corner. It was as you try and go faster than that, that is when the vehicles start to struggle a little bit. This was another car that only required one upgrade. That racing camshaft was all it took to get the M5 over the 200 mile an hour mark. The base cost of the car just 32,000 credits as we now head down the straight, gradually ticking its way up to 197. There's up to 198 miles an hour, very rapidly running out of straight down here, just to 199. We've got the corner to go, and again making the most of the road. It's a little bit safer than we had with a couple of cars. It does tick over to 200 a fraction earlier than some of the vehicles, but yeah, the M5 would achieve the speed for less money than the Lotus Carlton. I wish I would like to see the Carlton have beat it, but there we go. Another surprise that I wasn't particularly thinking about initially when I set out with this challenge, the Maserati Ghibli. The Ghibli is in the list, 34,800 credits for this one. Yeah, really was not expecting to see this car up on the list, but when I was browsing through the vehicles, this one had a pretty damn good top speed from standard. Again, it was a case of didn't need a huge amount of parts to get the car up to the required speed. Again, we were finding that these are perhaps not the most aerodynamic of vehicles, but the base cars were cheap enough and the base engines were good enough so that when it came to sticking on the race camshafts and upgrading the turbos and so on, that would be enough to push the car over the 200 mile an hour mark. Unfortunately as well, all of these cars had good enough gearboxes. I wasn't having to put race gearboxes in the car. I wasn't having to put adjustable gearboxes into the cars to extend the ratios. I didn't want to have to do that because that's more expense that you want to try to avoid when you try to build it as cheaply as possible with just going for power. Also, the cars were handling well enough. The Ghibli was pretty much on the limit of what I could do, getting to 200 miles an hour. Again, you see me running very much downhill as much as I could around the corner. Couldn't get the car stopped as I was having to run it very, very long into that. It did eventually get slowed down with a little bit of assistance of some curbs and a little bit of burnout as well with the car. It made it though, and cheaper than the M5. We're on to the top three now. The Nissan 300ZX is in third, just 32,000 credits for the Nissan to get up to that 200 mile an hour mark. Relatively cheap car, this one, just 20,000 credits to buy. In fact, it is the second cheapest car, base car, of all of the vehicles used in this at just 20,000 credits to begin with. However, this one did take more in the way of parts. 12,000 credits used on modifying the vehicle, the third most expensive. The problem with this one, it could have done a lot better. However, my routine of race turbos and race camshafts just wasn't quite enough to get the Nissan up to that 200 mile an hour mark. It also took race displacement and street exhaust. It was also getting quite close with all of that. So yeah, pretty expensive. If we could have avoided the displacement and the exhaust, that would have saved 4,000 credits. That would have been very, very impressive going. However, that was not the case. Of course, the 300ZX didn't quite have the same power from standard as some of the other vehicles had, so it needed more in the way of upgrades. It did, however, work. This is also another car that I'm very pleased to see on the list. I do like the 300ZX. In second place, Nissan were faring very, very well in this. The Nissan 350Z. This was perhaps the biggest surprise of the lot. Just 30,800 credits were required to get the 350Z. Much like the Ghibli, I would never particularly have thought this car would have been so high up the board. You know, the Viper, I was kind of expecting that kind of car to be possibly the way to go. I wasn't too surprised by, the Supra or the M5 or the Javelin and those vehicles. But the 350Z was mighty impressive. 26,000 credits to buy, but it only took 4,800 to get it up to the speed. The race camshaft, and I think the first adding on a turbo was the trick to getting this one to 200 miles an hour. Not very much in the way of parts. This was another case of the standard engine, the standard car was quick enough to get it close to the 200 miles an hour mark, and just those little, I say little parts, they were fairly big performance gained parts, were enough to push it over the mark. Again, I did have to run it down the hill a little bit to just to make sure, as I was with all of these cars, because when you're trying to get away with so much, yeah, a lot of them I was really pushing my luck. However, our victor by quite a margin, the Porsche 944, 25,950 credits, is all it took to get the 944 to the 200 miles an hour. The cheapest car to buy here, just 12,000 credits. For the Porsche, it was the second most expensive on upgrades, 13,950, but when the base car costs so little, that was very helpful, and the base engine was pretty damn good. So we could, again, stuck turbos on the vehicle, stuck the race camshafts in it, increased the displacement, but I had so much money to play around with that it didn't really matter. Again, once we've got up to that 180, 190 mile an hour mark, it was hard to keep accelerating the vehicle, but it was enough. The 475 horsepower in this Porsche was enough to get it to 201 mile an hour mark, so it equals the Ferrari F40 for 25,950 credits. That's all, to get the same speed as the Ferrari F40, and it got to that speed more convincingly than the Ghibli, more convincingly than the 350Z as well, because they were just hitting 200. And yeah, some celebratory donuts from the Porsche. When I set out, I was really not expecting to be able to do it for so little money. That is really not a huge amount of money. For 25,000 credits, you can have a 1.6 litre Astra. For 950 credits more, you can have a 200 mile an hour Porsche. That is a mighty impressive speed from the 944. That's yeah, really rather good going. I was expecting, when I initially started this challenge, I was thinking, well, the Viper was 51,000 credits for that Viper. That was pretty good going, but almost half the price, and the Porsche will be able to do it. Some good results from the Nissans, most definitely, and the big saloon cars also fared quite well, despite them not being exactly aerodynamic. The amount of power you could get out of them for very little in the way of money was enough to push them up to that speed. So there you go, for less than 26,000 credits on Forza 6, you can get a car that will reach 200 miles an hour. Be quite a handful through the corners, yes, but it will do that speed down the straights. However, that is it for this video, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.